In a small, rural village lived a young man named Samuel. Samuel was an orphan who had grown up working on various farms to meet his daily needs. Despite his tough circumstances, he remained resilient, waking up every morning to tend to the fields. He worked hard, cultivating the land to secure food and clothing for himself. One crisp morning, as the sun began to rise, a wealthy woman known throughout the village for her affluence and her unfortunate labor of being barren, approached Samuel's modest home. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Parker. She was a kind-hearted lady, but her inability to have children had caused her much sorrow. She had heard of Samuel's diligent work and decided to hire him to cultivate tomatoes on her estate. As Mrs. Parker knocked on Samuel's door, he was just finishing his morning routine of boiling tea. Surprised but polite, he invited her inside and offered her a cup of the hot beverage. They sat together, sipping tea in the calm morning air. Mrs. Parker felt a strange yet comforting presence in Samuel's home, a sense of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. While they drank their tea, Mrs. Parker found herself stealing glances at Samuel. There was something about his honest eyes and hard-working demeanor that stirred feelings within her she hadn't acknowledged before. She thought to herself, could this man be the answer to my prayers? Could he be the one to help me become a mother, despite what everyone says? After finishing their tea, Mrs. Parker and Samuel prepared to head to her farm. As they walked, she gently held his hand, guiding him along the path. Samuel carried his plow in his left hand, ready for the day's labor. He was grateful for the opportunity to earn some money, but he couldn't help but notice the soft touch of Mrs. Parker's hand and the way she looked at him. Arriving at her vast estate, Mrs. Parker led Samuel to a small piece of garden land. "This is where I want you to cultivate tomatoes," she said, her voice carrying a hint of hope. "I will pay you $50 for your work." Samuel nodded, appreciating the fair wage and the trust she was placing in him. As Samuel began to dig, Mrs. Parker watched from the balcony of her grand third-floor house. She admired his strong, muscular build and the dedication he showed in his work. Her thoughts began to wander, filled with dreams and desires she had long suppressed. "Until I marry this young man," she thought, "I will never give up hope." From her vantage point, Mrs. Parker saw not just a laborer, but a potential partner, someone who could bring joy and fulfillment into her life. She envisioned a future where they worked together, side by side, cultivating not just the land but also a loving family. Her heart brimmed with a newfound determination, one that gave her the courage to believe that perhaps, against all odds, she could rewrite her destiny. And so, as Samuel continued to toil in the garden, unaware of the profound impact he was having on the woman watching him, Mrs. Parker's thoughts crystallized into a resolve: she would pursue her dreams, and she would do everything in her power to ensure that Samuel became a permanent part of her life. From her balcony, Mrs. Evelyn Parker watched Samuel with a growing determination. She knew that society might frown upon her desires, considering the age difference and her status. But her heart yearned for a chance at happiness, for a family she had always dreamed of but never had. "It's better I tell him I love him," she thought to herself. "Even though I'm older than him, I must take this chance." Gathering her courage, Mrs. Parker descended from her house. As she made her way through the garden, she felt an unfamiliar sense of excitement and confidence. A smile spread across her face, her steps quickening as she approached Samuel. He looked up, startled by her sudden appearance. Dropping his cultivating tool, he stared at her, unsure of what was happening. "Samuel," she began, her voice trembling slightly but filled with resolve, "I admire you deeply. I need you to know that I want you to bear a child with me and to marry me. I have seen a lot in my life, and many people have judged me harshly. Some think I have aborted many children, but the truth is, I have never been able to conceive. Please, marry me. Samuel was taken aback, his mind racing. But I'm still young, he stammered, and I'm poor. How can I possibly be the right person for you? Mrs. Parker shook her head, her eyes pleading. Age doesn't matter to me, Samuel. And as for wealth, I have plenty. What I need is someone who can be a partner, who can share my life and help me fulfill my dream of having a family. Samuel stood there, his heart and mind in turmoil. He was touched by her sincerity and the vulnerability she displayed, yet he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of her request. The weight of her words and the gravity of the decision left him in a state of dilemma, unsure of what to do next. Samuel's thoughts raced as he tried to find the right words. Let me think first, he stammered, so that I can give you an answer tomorrow. But Mrs. Parker, her eyes filled with urgency, shook her head. No, just tell me now. I have loved you from the moment I saw you. I can't wait any longer. And you will not go anywhere today. You can stay here in my compound. I have many rooms where you can sleep and take a bath. Samuel, feeling the intensity of the moment, nodded. Okay, that's fine, but about the love story. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. A radiant smile spread across Mrs. Parker's face. She felt a glimmer of hope and relief. All right, come with me, she said warmly. Leave the tilling for now and accompany me to the house. Let's have lunch together. As they walked towards her grand home, Samuel couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. Stepping inside, he was awestruck by the luxurious interior. The living room boasted a massive 72-inch TV, plush sofa couches, and elegant decorations that spoke of wealth and taste. Mrs. Parker went to the kitchen and returned with a chilled soda from the fridge. Here, drink this while I prepare lunch, she said, handing it to Samuel. He took the soda, feeling its coolness flow through his body as he sipped it. He couldn't believe the stark contrast between this opulent environment and his simple, hard-working life. Mrs. Parker soon brought out a delicious meal and served it on a single large plate. Let's eat together, she said, sitting beside him. They shared the meal, and for the first time, Samuel felt a strange but comforting sense of belonging. After they finished eating, Mrs. Parker handed Samuel a towel and a bar of soap. Why don't you take a bath in the bathroom? You must be tired and dusty from the walk. Samuel hesitated, feeling a pang of discomfort. I'm not used to bathing in a room, he admitted. I always bathe in the river. Mrs. Parker's eyes softened with understanding. There's nothing to worry about, Samuel. You'll find it refreshing. With a tentative nod, Samuel took the towel and soap and headed to the bathroom. He entered the room, still feeling uneasy but also curious about this new experience. As he began to wash, the warm water felt soothing against his skin, washing away the dust and fatigue of the day's labor. After Samuel finished his bath, feeling refreshed and clean, he joined Mrs. Parker in the living room. They spent the afternoon watching videos together, laughing and sharing stories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mrs. Parker went to the kitchen to prepare supper. The aroma of her cooking filled the house, and soon they sat down to enjoy a hearty meal. After supper, Samuel tried to excuse himself to return to his own home, but Mrs. Parker stopped him. There's no need for you to leave tonight, she insisted gently. We have plenty of visitors' rooms. You can sleep here. She guided Samuel to a beautifully furnished bedroom, the bed adorned with crisp linens and soft pillows. It was unlike anything Samuel had ever seen. He thanked her, still feeling a bit overwhelmed by the day's events. In the middle of the night, Samuel was startled awake by a scream. Mrs. Parker burst into his room, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. I saw a monster at my window, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. I'm afraid. I can't sleep alone. May I stay with you? Samuel, though confused, nodded. All right, you can stay here if it helps you feel safe. Mrs. Parker slipped into the bed beside him, her presence making Samuel feel a mix of unease and compassion. As they lay there, she turned to him, her voice soft but insistent. Let's enjoy ourselves, Samuel, she whispered. Samuel shook his head firmly. No, Mrs. Parker. I can't. It's not right. Despite her persistence, Samuel remained resolute in his refusal. They spent the rest of the night in silence, each lost in their thoughts. As dawn broke, the first light of morning filtered into the room, signaling the end of a long and eventful night. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow in the bedroom. Mrs. Parker woke early, her mind still buzzing with anticipation. She hurried to the kitchen, eager to prepare beverages for Samuel and to hear his decision about their future. As she brewed tea and set out some pastries, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. She called Samuel to join her in the kitchen. Good morning, Samuel. I've made us some tea. Let's talk. Samuel joined her, still groggy from the night's unrest. They sat at the table, sipping their tea as Mrs. Parker's eyes shone with hopeful curiosity. So, have you made your decision about us? She asked gently. Samuel took a deep breath. Yes, I have decided that I want to be with you. But I must ask you not to deceive me or make promises you cannot keep. I need to trust that this is real and not just a fleeting emotion. Mrs. Parker's face lit up with joy. Thank you, Samuel. I promise you my intentions are sincere. I'm so happy you've agreed. I can't wait for tonight. As the day wore on, Mrs. Parker could hardly contain her excitement. When evening finally arrived, they spent it together, enjoying each other's company in the warmth of Mrs. Parker's home. The night was filled with laughter, conversation, and moments of deep connection. Their enjoyment of each other was palpable, and sleep eluded them as they reveled in their newfound closeness. Days turned into weeks, and each night was spent together, growing closer and deeper in their relationship. They found comfort and happiness in each other's presence, and their bond strengthened with each passing day. However, a few months later, Mrs. Parker began to experience morning sickness. Concerned and hopeful, she decided to buy a pregnancy test. She went to the store and purchased the test, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. Upon returning home, she prepared to take the test. Samuel was by her side, offering his support and reassurance. They waited together, the atmosphere charged with hope and anxiety. As the minutes ticked by, Mrs. Parker clutched Samuel's hand, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. After Mrs. Parker took the pregnancy test, she anxiously waited for the result. When the positive outcome appeared, tears of joy streamed down her cheeks. Overwhelmed with emotion, she looked up and whispered a heartfelt prayer, thanking God for this miracle and the blessing of a new beginning. Thank you for this gift, she said softly, her voice choked with gratitude. I am so grateful for this chance to have a family. As the months passed, Mrs. Parker's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and her joy grew with each passing day. Samuel stayed by her side, supporting her through every stage of her pregnancy. They prepared for the arrival of their baby with excitement and anticipation. When the time for her labor finally arrived, Mrs. Parker went into early labor. Samuel, filled with concern and urgency, rushed her to the hospital. He drove swiftly through the night, his heart racing with worry and anticipation. At the hospital, Mrs. Parker was quickly attended to by the medical staff. Nurses guided her through the process, offering comfort and care. Samoa stayed close, offering encouragement and holding her hand through the labor. After a challenging but successful delivery, Mrs. Parker gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Blessing, a testament to the joy and gratitude they felt. As they held their newborn son, the couple was filled with a deep sense of fulfillment and love. The arrival of Blessing was met with a mix of surprise and skepticism in the village. Some villagers, who had once looked down on Mrs. Parker and her circumstances, found themselves feeling ashamed of their previous judgments. The birth of Blessing was a turning point, revealing the true strength and beauty of Mrs. Parker's journey and the love she had built with Samoa.